Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the first episode of the Open Window podcast on the Almighty Network YouTube channel by me, Panacotta, or Pan for short. If you don't know who I am or what this all even is, I recommend checking out my introduction video on this channel. But now let's get right into it. Today's topic that I want to talk about, the German school system. For this first episode, I decided to go all solo, so no guests for today, but that might change in future episodes. And in this one, I basically just want to talk about the many types of schools that are in place in this country, and then give some criticism, some of my own criticism on the system itself, see whether it's actually a good system or not, since like all things in this world, there's always a positive and a negative side. So let's just discuss this area and see what's the good and what's the bad. Oh, and also, as a heads up, I will be using German terminology, things that are only really understood well in the German context. So when I do that, I will try to, for one, explain this terminology as well as possible, so you always know where I'm at and what I'm talking about. And for the people watching, you will also have images on screen showing what I'm talking about. Like in, I think, most other countries, you of course start off your school experience in elementary school. In Germany, you're in elementary school for 4 years. Nothing out of the ordinary. The real difference to other school systems starts right after 4th grade. You, your parents, and your head teachers come together, sit down, and talk about what will happen to you after you finish 4th grade. Because unlike the US, there isn't something like a middle school or a high school. It's all one thing, but also it isn't. Let me explain. There are 4 main types of schools in Germany: the Hauptschule, the Gesamtschule, the Realschule, and the Gymnasium. If you didn't get anything that I just said, don't worry, I will explain. The schools after elementary school, these 4 types that I just named, are in some type of hierarchy. The first one I mentioned, the Hauptschule, let's just call it School D, is the lowest. Then after this, a little bit higher, is the Gesamtschule, The Gesamtschule, let's call it School C. Then, if we move one step up, we have the Realschule. Let's just call it School B. And on the very top, I wouldn't say best, but in terms of the hierarchy, it's the best type of school, the Gymnasium. Let's call it School A. Now, the main question that some of you listening might have is, what determines where you go after elementary school? What type of school do you get assigned to and why? And there's actually a simple answer to that: your grades and sometimes even your behavior. They look at that. The better your grades are in 4th grade, not in elementary school in general, in 4th grade, the better your grades are in 4th grade, the better your chance is, or the higher your chance is, to get to a top school, so to say. Meaning that if you get like straight Fs, or even straight Ds sometimes, or E's, yeah, because in Germany there's 6 marks, you get to School D, the worst one. If it's a little bit better, School C, even better, like straight B's or sometimes C's, you get to school B instead of C. And if you get top marks, like only A's, sometimes B's, welcome to school A. And now another question arises. Why does all this even matter? What do you gain from getting to a top school in terms of the hierarchy? And once again, simple answer. College. If you want to go to college, yeah, tough luck if you didn't get to school A, because you can only go to university if you graduate from school A. Or sometimes you can also graduate from school C. There is a program that lets you graduate there. You can also go to college after. But I will explain later why, even though it works, it's still sometimes a little bit controversial, let's say. And also, not to forget, there's also another exception to this rule. You can technically get to college if you were placed in school D or school B, because if your grades are good enough, you can change schools after you graduate and get to school A. There you stay for 3 to now I think even 4 more years. You graduate again. And now you have the chance to get to college. And what happens if you just don't want to go to college? Does it then even matter in which type of school you are? Also, yes. Even if you don't want to go to college and work after school instantly, trade school, some training, apprenticeship, something like that. There is a German term for this called Ausbildung, but I don't think it exists in English. Though I think that you get what I'm talking about, like a job right after school. You train for it and then you hopefully get a well-paid job. These jobs also very often require you to have graduated from a higher ranking school, preferably school A. School B is like also fine in a lot of cases, but school C is the absolute like cutoff. If you only graduated from school D, the lowest, I don't know what to tell y'all, but you don't have a lot of chances. And of course, there's always, like always in life, an exception, or exceptions in this case. You can, of course, get a job that is well paid, that you like or love, if you graduate from school D. But more often than not, your chances of this ever happening are very low. And graduating from the highest form of school, school A, is like a free pass to do whatever you want to do as long as your grades are good enough. That, of course, doesn't mean that if you graduate with straight D's in school A, that you can get anywhere. Of course not. There's certain like courses in college that you need an A, like on average, right? An A or an B to even get in. So people that with bad grades, even though they are in a top ranking school, won't get in. And now I realize that I think I digressed. I already jumped into the criticism, so let's just do that now. I don't fully approve of the German school system. And I think the people listening might have already noticed some areas where problems would arise. Let's start from the very beginning, elementary school. Your whole life, or a big part of your life, is decided right then and there. It depends on how well you do in school, specifically in 4th grade. And that is the deciding factor on whether you get to a top ranking school or not. And of course, as I said earlier, you can get from school D to school A if your grades are good enough. But how often does this realistically happen? Not a whole lot. Talking from personal experience, I have never seen or heard personally of a student that was good enough to change schools from lowest to highest. It happens. I've seen it online. People tell others online that they made it, and good for them. But I've never seen or experienced it firsthand. Recently, I came into contact with a couple of my very old friends from elementary school that didn't make the cut, so to say, and got to a school C and school B, while I went on to school A because my grades were good enough. They are not dumb people. Of course, grades don't mean that you're good grades don't mean that you're smart. Bad grades don't show that you're dumb. It's other factors. But the school thinks you're not good enough. And I meet these people, my old friends, and I see that they are more than capable of being in a higher ranking school, but they didn't get the chance back then. And let's say then you get to school D. You would expect that at least the education plan, what you learn, what the main topics every year are, that they are more or less the same, right? And also false. When looking at what students learn in their last grade in a school B, I realized that they didn't even learn things that I learned in like 6th or 7th grade, which was wild to me. If you then have grades that are good enough and you can get from school B to school A, which happens often, but also relatively to the amount of students in this school B, it's also kind of low. But I digress once again. They get to school A, their knowledge has a lot of missing areas, if that makes sense. They didn't learn all the necessary skills or things that are required of them in school A. So they have to learn them from scratch, often by themselves. Top schools are not very considerate of students that are lacking in certain areas. And as a last point of criticism I want to give is that, like in a lot of other countries, there are not enough teachers working, especially in lower ranking schools. I, for one, want to become a teacher, but I'm studying to become a teacher in a school A ranking school C or school A. Both things are fine. But no one wants to be a teacher in a lower ranking school, right? They get less money. They are often looked down upon by people. So why should they even try and become a teacher in a lower ranking school? We don't have enough teachers in schools in general, but school D and school C sometimes, depends on the place you're working at, or the location, I mean, they suffer. They don't have enough personnel. And with this, I reach the end of my criticism. I could talk about certain intricacies of these schools and even go as far as to college and talk about why college is not all that great sometimes, or the system itself. But this might be something for another video, because in this episode I only really want to talk about the school types after elementary school and before college. You might be also asking yourselves right now, or even earlier, this all sounds very complicated, so convoluted, and I said so many bad things about it that I didn't like. Why is this system still going on? Why is it still in place? And once again, simple answer. Schools or the government wants schools to be as homogeneous as possible, meaning that the best students get into the best schools, the worst students, according to the government, want to have to go to a worse school so they don't get mixed up. The education plan can be mostly the same for every school, or for every type of school. Like school A's have always the same plan, school B's have the same plan always, and they don't have to mix around or look for ways to incorporate weaker, let's say, students into this whole equation. So if you would ask me, what do you actually like about the school system, or is there anything to like about it? This would partly be a positive. Even though it sounds and also is kinda bad, the concept on paper doesn't seem to be all that bad. If you have better students in a class, you know these students are capable of solving these exercises. They are all mostly on the same level. But as time goes on, people from other countries enter Germany. Same happens to, I think, all the countries in this world. And classrooms become heterogeneous, meaning that they get mixed up. You don't have these only first language German students anymore in your classes. Now there's a lot of students in every form of school that learn German as their second or even third language, which means that now this school system isn't all that great anymore. It might have been pretty good like many years ago, but as time goes on, you see that it's not all that greatly working anymore. You can't look at students like a group. You have to look at them as individuals with weaknesses and strengths. Dividing them according to their grades might have been working in the past, but it isn't, or shouldn't be a thing anymore. And that's coming from someone who is in college trying to become a teacher. I see all these things in the background, the government trying to fix things, but they still fail, and all this going on. I see it all, and I know that there needs to be a change. Now, I don't want to talk for too long now. I think everything I wanted to say, I was able to say. I want to conclude this topic with this final statement. Your whole life is decided by your grades in 4th grade, and also partly whether your teachers did their job well. Because if not, you're fucked. There needs to be a change in the system, a big change. Abolish this whole type of school D, C, B, A thing completely, and have them be something completely new. Mix them up, because classrooms are not as homogeneous as they were 30 or 40 years ago. The country is still too conservative, afraid to change things up. And this also needs to change, ironically. yeah, I think I think this is really all I wanted to say in this episode. I don't know what the next episode will be on, but I should be able to record the second episode either next week or at the max in 2 weeks. So stay tuned. Uh, maybe you're interested in the podcasts of other people. I don't know who will be uploading this weekend apart from me, but maybe there will be something interesting to watch or listen to. So yeah, I'm Panakota, and you're listening to the Open Window Podcast, Episode 1. Have a good one.